Good morning, everybody, and the Pendle Live, the week Pendle Live. Today we're going to be talking about Roger Nowell at that time with the trials, and I'm going to hand you over to Joe, who's going to introduce Roger to you, and I'll just keep in touch. I hope you enjoy. Right, Joe.
Thank you. Okay, so just as Shelley said, good morning, everybody. Yes, we are going to be talking about Roger Nowell. Now, out of all the research and everything that you can do on the Pendle witches, I find that Roger Nowell is probably not so much a forgotten character because he's a huge part, but there's not much research about him. If you type him into Google or into a book, I'm sure, Karen, you'll agree with me, stuff is so widespread on him. There's no actual, it takes you a while to find his date of birth. It takes you a while to find where he's buried, things like that. He's quite a tricky character for whatever reason that may be.
Yes.
Now, we know that Roger Nowell was born around the time of 1582 and died in 1623. I think. I could be wrong.
Well, I just to compound what you just said about how difficult it is, I've got his year of birth as 62, and also another reference saying 52. So it's.
Oh, okay. I think we might have an expert that will be joining us a little bit later. I think
it just shows how difficult it is to just really pin him down and to find out who was he really.
Absolutely.
I think I had it at 1623. Would that make him about 41 then, roughly around that age? So he was
51, 61, something like that.
Yeah. Because we know that at the time of the trial, so in August 1612, he would have been around 60 years old. So give up, birth. See, that's bizarre in itself that somebody is with such a great importance hasn't actually got a fixed find it quick birth date.
Yes, possibly due to the Civil War, which may well have destroyed records because there was a lot of fighting in the area,
and so his family was quite largely involved in that, weren't they? So Roger Nowell, let's kind of jump forward a little bit and then come back. Let's talk about why he was important for the witch trials, and then a little bit about the way he lived, his family, his home. So Roger Nowell was our Justice of Peace. He was the local magistrate for the Pendle area. He lived in a place called Reed Hall, which is on the edge of the Pendle Forest. Didn't live right in the middle, he lived on the edge. And you think a Justice of Peace would have been more beneficial living slap bang in the middle. But maybe he didn't want to live in the middle because he knew what was going on and chose to turn a blind eye to a lot of things. So he was a Puritan magistrate, as me and Karen were talking about this before. Again, religion plays a huge part in his beliefs. And I mean, I think, was it yesterday that we had a brief conversation, Karen, and you said just how much he was like King James in a way, because he could have been incredibly paranoid. He could have been so caught up in the games that his own mind was playing. Can you just tell us what that was?
Yes, there were an awful lot of influences on Roger before the witch trials happened. There was obviously James I came to the throne, and he would have really wanted to impress the new king. His family had risen to prominence under Elizabeth, and a couple of his great uncles were actually very prominent churchmen and theologians, divinity professors, and even bishops, and they really helped to form the Church of England under Elizabeth. So they were very, very influential. So that would have been a very strong influence on him. There was also a cousin who was a professor of theology at Cambridge, who worked very closely with William Perkins, who was a very famous theologian and published an awful number of tracts and books and papers and sermons, including a discourse on witchcraft, in which he proposed or was a proponent that good witches were even worse than bad witches because they encouraged people to come under the influence of the devil for healing, etc., and was a direct threat to the church, of course. And they also believed that the Pope was the Antichrist. So very, very strong religious influences in his past life. And there was also a case of witchcraft connected to the family as well, a few years previously, called the Lancashire Seven, the Starkey family, where children were believed to be bewitched for a number of years. And that resulted in trials and a hanging. So there was an awful lot of witchcraft background from the religious side, the theory of witchcraft, but also in practice as well. So there was an awful lot going on under the surface before all this happened in 1612.
Okay, so just bringing up to the comment that our advisor, our oracle of Pendle factual knowledge, has popped up for us. Thomas has said that Roger was probably born around 1560, but no baptism record has survived. Could possibly be the Civil War, like you mentioned, Karen. The 1582 baptism at Whalley is for Roger's son and main heir. In 1623, the burial for Roger Nowell, gent, is his son. Roger Nowell Armiger is the magistrate for the trials who died in 1624. Oh, I was way out with his birth date, but I wasn't too far with his death. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. There we go. Super. So I'm glad that's cleared that up.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I'm under the impression that Roger had acquired the estate with the dissolution of Whalley Abbey.
I think that there was yes, I think the family did, and an awful lot of the local families would have benefited from the dissolution of Whalley Abbey, in gaining land because of favour with the current monarch, whether it was Henry or Elizabeth. I think under Mary, most of them were in exile, and also I think an awful lot of the places were built from the stone of Whalley Abbey. So on a large basis with the land, they would have benefited, but also with a small basis, it provided an awful lot of nice building material for them.
So there's possibly, and this is an absolute shot in the dark, there's possibly what was Malkin Tower could have maybe been built from the stone of an abbey, perhaps.
Who knows? Although would that have been built of stone even? But yet we'll never know. Yes, I think the stone for Whalley Abbey, it turns up all over the place. I think even on the witch walks going through a gatepost, there's carved stone. I don't know exactly where.
Sorry, my dogs.
But yeah, the stone.
Can I just take a wee second? Can I just take a wee second, ladies, and I'll just say hello to a few people that came in to join us. Just quickly, so we've got Misty. Hello, Misty. Thomas, of course. Thank you for your comment. And also Jackie, Harry, Frankie, and Sarah, who are in the chat. Also, thank you for your comments so far, guys.
Okay, so just going back a little bit, we've kind of established roughly how old Roger was, looking at the time of the trial. So family-wise, I'm under the impression that he was married and he'd had 2 children. Obviously, his son being the heir to the estate once he passed.
Yes.
Now,
okay, I found quite a lot more than 2 children.
Oh, okay.
So I found quite a large family.
Wouldn't be surprising in that time, would it? Really?
I think there was tragedy as well. I think at least 2 died in infancy, but
again, sadly uncommon.
But at least, so maybe even into double figures. But again, the records are spread out and so confusing, because of course, like Yorkshire folk, Lancashire folk also reuse the same names and don't waste any.
Well, I do
So
believe
it's very difficult to be exact and say with any kind of certainty what there is, although Thomas may well be able to do that for us.
I was just about to say, Thomas, can you shed any light onto, you know, how many children Roger Nowell had, or even anything on his wife? Because I've spent years and years, you know, trying to have a look and looking at books and on the internet and everything else. You kind of become quite stuck with him.
Yes,
that's right. That's what I found when I was trying to research. Maybe the joke I was looking at, it said he was actually married twice, and it was his second wife most of his children with. So it's a bit with his first marriage as well.
right.
And if that's true or not, or if I'm just reading stuff that's not actually correct. Because as you say,
just as, you know,
it's quite a murky figure for somebody who had such an impact on the area and on, well, English history from that time. And as part of one of the most famous witch trials, he's a very murky figure when you compare him to Matthew Hopkins from Essex, where a lot more is known, and you can really get a handle on who the proponent of the trials and the persecution was. It's a bit different here, and that fascinates me. I'm really researching him at the moment for my next book, and it really fascinates me as to just who he was and what motivated him. We've mentioned a few things, but
money mainly.
Money and land and status as well, especially with the king.
Yes, absolutely, Karen. So
just you say that Matthew I do apologise. I'm having bad Just carry on, Joe.
Okay, so just keeping with the in-sticking then of a little bit about Roger's family. Yes. So Roger passes 1623, 1624. I think we're going for around that era, well, around those years, backed up by Thomas. That he then passes his estate on to his son.
Yes, it's his son Roger inherits.
Here we go. Okay, so Thomas has jumped in with this. His wife was Catherine Merton, or Morton, the daughter of John Merton. They appear to have had at least 10 children, but there are only 6 baptism records at Whalley. So you were right, Karen. That was a big family.
Yes.
Even by my standards.
Yeah. Well, at that time, there was no birth control, and the more children you had, the more likely you were to be able to pass on land and wealth and influence in the area, because he had a lot of land and a lot of houses as well, so we needed to fill them all and keep control of them, whether it was his sons or his daughter's husbands. So yes, large family.
Yeah, because keeping it in the family, you know, it was quite important, wasn't it, really, for things like that. Now, just going back to the land, this is it a myth? Is it a legend? Is it fact, or is it fiction? When I've given tours on the Pendle witches, I've always been under the impression, until very recently, that Alice Nutter and Roger Nowell did not get on for one of many reasons, but the main reason being Alice went up against Roger Nowell a little before 1612. Let's just say 1610 for argument's sake. Alice would have been roughly around the same age as Roger, and she went up against him in a land dispute. And it happened to have... Sorry, my dog's looking at the postman out of the window. Quickly. And I think my next door neighbours are having their windows cleaned.
Great timing for the post.
Yeah.
Live TV.
It is, yeah. Reality TV is best at my house. So there's this speculation that there was a land dispute that happened between Alice and between Roger. That Alice went into court. They were shocked, shock horror that a woman turned up to represent what was hers back in 1612. As we've mentioned so many times, women weren't allowed to have a brain, let alone a voice that went with it. Do we believe that this lady with this, because the Nutters, as we spoke about before when we covered them, were a very, they were a very respected family. Even to this day, they still have farms and land up in the Pendle area. Do we believe as a family they would have sent a woman to represent them if this had gone to court?
Yeah,
for a start.
Yeah. But it doesn't really hold up, does it? It is a nice theory.
No.
It fits in very nicely and gives a very good motivation for Roger Nowell to get rid of Alice Nutter and to bring her into the whole trials and accusations. But you're right, the woman wouldn't have had any standing. Even as a widow, it would have been her son who would have been there fighting in court. And even if it had happened, and if she had have done that, then when Roger Nowell brought her into the witchcraft accusations, she would have been able to have defended herself, and she wouldn't have held back in shouting her case and making the judges listen if she'd already had a track record of doing that.
That's successful
So for me,
as well.
Connecting the dots, they don't connect well within the known facts.
So that brings me on to a point as to why didn't they get on? They were both respectable families, and we know that Roger, the Knowles rubbed shoulders with the Shuttleworths. They rubbed shoulders all together. That class of people mixed together.
Yes,
and
that's very much so, and intermarried as well.
Absolutely. So it seems very, very odd to me that a family with such calibre as the Nutters and the Knowles clash.
Yes. So there was something going on because as well, there was nobody in her family stood up for her or tried to defend her or help her at all. I mean, it could be, I think there's one thing that we do know is that she was Catholic. So that would have been a big mark against her in Knowles' book. And actually, I should have mentioned earlier, just before the trials happened in March, April of 1612, there was a crackdown on Catholics, and King James had sent out an edict that anybody who did not communicate or take communion at the parish church over Easter would be brought up on charges, and they'd have to answer for it. So there was a big crackdown on Catholics. Hopefully Joe will be back in a moment. So that would have been a way of getting rid of her. And if she hadn't have been at church over Easter, over Good Friday, when the Malkin Tower meeting went, then she had no defence when she was accused of being at Malkin Tower. So it could have been brought in that way. And it was also possible that she maybe suffered from dementia and the family wanted rid of her. And maybe the local gentry wanted rid of her because she was a pain. She wasn't doing what she was told. She couldn't remember what she was supposed to be doing. And she wasn't playing ball and was causing problems. So there's two issues there, Catholic and possibly dementia. But I believe you have a different theory, Jo.
I do, and this is only a wild thought that came into my head, and it's probably totally wrong, but we're here to talk about all the different angles and to look at it from a different point of view. Okay, so Roger, again, this is totally, it's not even my theory, it's just an idea, it's something to throw out into the bag for a topic of discussion. So we know that Alice and Roger are around the same age. I believe because the nature of Roger's work as a magistrate, he did a lot of travelling. We know that at least twice a week they did local court hearings, which happened at either his home in Reed or another one. It's gone from my mind, but we'll wait for Thomas's comments pop up at the bottom. So he would have done a lot of travelling and a lot of staying away. Oh, there we go. So, as for Reed Hall, it was the main seat of the Nowell family from the mid-14th century.
Right.
The original family seat was the Great Merley in Clitheroe, but was exchanged for a moiety for the manor of the Reed. Oh, okay. Okay.
So
Wow.
going
So,
back time.
yeah, so that goes back a long time. That goes back to really when, well done, Thomas, it's the 14th century. Yeah. There we go. So we've got them both around the same age. So if you look at the theory that perhaps he spent a long time away from his wife, we know that Alice didn't necessarily live with her husband and her son, which is the confusion a little bit sometimes, that people think that she lived in the.
Or was she widowed? Alice.
Oh, maybe. Oh.
Yeah, sorry, just to throw that in.
Yeah, well, this is what it's all about, isn't it? This is why we do what we do, to kind of discuss, to try and look at every angle that could possibly, happen. So they're around the same age. They spend a lot of time away from their husbands or their wives. What if something had turned a little sour?
Yes.
I do personally think that it was a religion thing, but this is an EastEnders storyline.
Yes.
What if maybe they had been entangled in something as a love affair?
Yeah.
And it maybe got a little out of hand. Roger needed a way to get rid of her. Maybe she wanted more than he did. Maybe he wanted more than she did.
Maybe he realised with the edict from King James that he could not be involved with a Catholic. And he had to knock it on the head. He couldn't afford for that to get out.
Yes, so she was widowed. Yes, absolutely. Right. Well, yeah. So there we go. A grieving widow. So yeah. Oh, it's ticking all the boxes. I'm waiting for the drums to kick in a minute. It's a okay. So yeah, maybe. Thank you, Maureen. Yeah, Maureen's just confirmed. Alice, she understands she was a widow. So. What if there was something else? What if her family found the need not to defend her? If they were having an affair and maybe he wanted rid of her to hide the truth. Yeah, it's exactly what we've just said. Her family didn't defend her because maybe they knew about it.
Yes, and didn't approve.
Yeah.
Yes, Frank is right as well there. Disability is seen as an embarrassment and hid away at that time, some kind of mark. Quite absolutely. Right. And quite possibly proof of witchcraft too. Yes.
Yeah, or Elizabeth Southerns was born with a birth defect. So she had one, Demdike's daughter, for anybody that's just kind of thinking, hang on a minute, who was she? One eye was higher than the other. I think her right eye was an inch lower and quite sunken back. Purely as research, and medical things happen now, a birth defect, but back then it would have been seen as something very, very sinister, sadly enough. So yeah, Frankie, you're absolutely right. So yeah, so a different spin on it, different turn on the tail. Like we say, this is just something else that we're throwing into our mix bag. There is nothing to back this up that I can find.
It's an interesting thought. It is an interesting thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So what if? So Roger had, my dog's at it again. I do apologise. You've got Shelley and the technical sounds and you can't hear me over a German Shepherd cross barking at whoever's walking up my street. Frank, down. That was my assertive voice. Were you impressed? Down.
Well done.
He's reluctantly listened. Okay, so that we know that there was a meeting of Alison Device and the peddler, which happened. But then Roger doesn't hear of this until 12 days later?
Yes, it takes a little while, doesn't it? And that confuses me. But then I realised that in those days we had quarter days when the rents were due, and the rents would have been due at around that time. So maybe the son was just busy. There was just too much going on for that time. And it would have taken a little while for a letter to have gone from from
Or for
John
him
Law
to
to
have
his
road.
son Abraham Law. Because don't forget, he couldn't speak either, so it may have taken a while before he got enough speech to be able to tell them who he was and how to contact his son to get help. So it could have been quite innocent and just because of the nature of a stroke.
Yeah,
That they couldn't communicate.
Yeah, definitely, Karen. I agree with that could probably counter this 12-day delay, you know, as to the obviously the unfortunate happening to him, to his son finding out. Now, Roger Nowell as a person, you'll know, Karen, from being such the author that you are, that every author tells their own tale on Roger.
Yes.
Now, the books that I've read, and I'm not sure, I know that Shelley, you've read quite a lot of books as well on this. Roger Nowell's kind of painted as quite a kindly man. In one book in particular, he's painted as quite a nice chap. Do you believe that would be the way? Do you believe that he was, you know, he was just a nice guy, you know, he turned a blind eye to a lot of the goings on in this breadth of this dark hill. He did things for an easy life.
I can believe that he did things for an easy life and to suit himself. I think he was a very powerful man, and I think status was very important to him because he was High Sheriff of Lancashire as well a couple of years before the witch trial. So he took his duties as magistrate very seriously. He also went for the highest office that he could. He wanted to impress the king. So I think he was a very self-serving man.
Well, I think there is a quote. So. There is a quote that I found that apparently was said that he was serving God, king, and himself. I
would agree with that. Yes.
Yeah.
I think because he wouldn't have reached the status that he did if he wasn't serving himself, if he wasn't quite ruthless and prepared to go for it. But as you've mentioned, there's a source that says he was a kindly man. People are complicated. They're not just one thing. There's all different sides to him. So he would have had soft spots, but who or what they were for, I'm still working that out. But it would have been a complex character, yes.
Yeah.
Very definitely.
So from Reed Hall, beautiful, majestic building. He had a very good life. He ate good food. Yes. They drank good wine that was imported from France. He had a very, very good life. Now, for somebody such as let's look at just Alison Device, because obviously she was his first kind of catch-hold, wasn't she? She was his first money spinner and such.
His first victim.
Yes, perfect wording. Yes, absolutely. So she's gone from this dark hovel of a house to this well, whether it be Reed Hall or where they were questioned in Fence, to quite a beautiful how the other half live.
Yes, very definitely. We do have pictures of Reed Hall from around 1750, where it's a very imposing building with two large wings and lots of outbuildings and side buildings. It possibly wouldn't have been that grand in 1612. I think a lot of that building would have taken place after the Civil War, but it would still have been a large home. He obviously took a lot of pride in land and his home and his status, so he would have built it up as much as possible and made it as imposing as possible just to fit with his status.
Yeah,
so it really would have been, from Malkin Tower to going into Reed Hall, it would have been large, massive space, big fireplaces, possibly chimneys, which would have been a massive status and very rare in Lancashire at that time. There would have been good food, good cheese, meat, after Lent, of course, and good ale, drinks, and a lot of land as well, a lot of space. Given over to pleasure, to hunting grounds. Let's not forget, Forest of Pendle was hunting grounds, and the Reed Hall estate would have had a decent portion of that and under his control. So yes, it would have been very, very imposing to the Davis family, all of them, and not just Alison. Yes.
So that they bring this young girl into this. It's a new world, isn't it?
It is, yes.
So they bring her into this new world. I personally believe that he would have used her for as much information as he could.
Yes.
And I believe the way that he did this was, a bit bribery. He bribed her to an extent.
I'm sure that would have been part of it. It had been carrot and stick. I think at the time, torture wasn't allowed except in the castle. So in the castles, they could use things like thumb screws. But in the manors in the halls, torture was not allowed. But of course, that's a 17th century definition of torture.
Yeah.
So things like sleep deprivation, which we now count as torture, that wouldn't have been. So they would have kept her awake, or when they were examining them, they would have been able to just keep them awake all night for more than one night, and watching them to make sure they didn't sleep, and watching for familiars. They would have strip searched for witch marks, and pricked as well to see if there was pain and blood. So they did have things open to them. So there would have been threat there as well. There would have certainly discomfort and what we would have now classed as torture, but not then. And as you say, there would have been the other side of the coin as well. There would have been bribery, food, status. If you help us with this, then we won't charge you with trying to rob John Law. So they'd have been very clever with the words and used words that Alison just would not have understood, because the language that they both spoke, although they would have both spoken English, there would have been very different forms of English.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that would just add, it wouldn't have been taken into account, whether it wasn't taken into account maybe for them to adapt it. A bit like if we look at court, it's something like court nowadays.
Yes.
How everything has to be adapted, even language has to be adapted. If you're talking to a child or a teenager or an adult or, somebody elderly, back then it didn't matter. Then it didn't matter at all. No.
I mean, even today, it's very difficult to understand legalese with a solicitor's letter and contracts. And of course, he was a very prominent magistrate. So, he would have easily have been able to twist her words, twist what she said, lead her down the path without her realizing what she was saying.
Yeah.
So, yes.
And then of course, we look at all I kind of feel that everybody that was questioned in it was vulnerable in their own way.
Yes.
So we talked about Alison being quite a boisterous, she was quite a stubborn young girl. But if she'd been sleep deprived, for example,
yes,
we all know how that makes us feel.
Yes.
Whether this boisterous temper of hers had come out and they classed that as workings of the devil, or maybe she'd mumble or chatter away to herself a little bit. She was vulnerable. We know that Jacob Device, when he was questioned, he was quite a simple young lad. Maybe now that we would perhaps put him somewhere on the autism spectrum, something like that, from the way that he's described.
Yes.
Demdike, Chattox, dementia, Alzheimer's, elderly.
Yes.
Elizabeth, Southerns. So that she had even though that she was physically deformed, we don't quite know her, her mental state and things.
Well, I think there is a clue to her mental state as well, because I think, forgive me if I get the name wrong, one of the people, it might have been Baldwin, I'm not 100% sure. She had to ask Demdike to go to them to ask for her money for the work that she'd done. So she wasn't confident. Maybe her speech wasn't good. Maybe she was on the autism scale as well. If she'd had a problem with her eye, I think there was a suggestion it was either a birth defect, so it could have been a very difficult birth, and it could have been damaged when she was being birthed, or there was possibly been dropped as a baby, and so there could have been some brain damage there as well. So as a family, they were extremely vulnerable for that day and age.
So for them to be was starving, which they were daily, and cold, to go into, well, I tell you what, and it just, I'm sat here looking at my kids' plastic kitchen, and I'm thinking of all this plastic food, to have this laden table of goodies laid out before them and saying, well, all you have to do is talk to us. You're going to be okay.
Yes.
You can have all of this, but you have to talk to us. We then have to look at the way that Roger Nowell perhaps did the same thing to little 9-year-old Jeanette. I mean, nowadays it would be classed as grooming.
Absolutely, yes. And I think he also manipulated their ages as well. I think Janet was 11 or 12 and he presented her as 9. Alison was 18, he presented her as 14. So he manipulated their ages as well. But yeah, little Janet just would not have had a chance. She would have thought all her Christmases would have come at once, even though she wouldn't really have known anything like a Christmas.
No.
And I'm thinking about that's actually the wrong turn of phrase, because the Puritans were against Christmas, but still, she
would have been showered.
She would have known nothing like it. She would have known nothing like that existed. She wouldn't have known it was possible. She would have just been absolutely flawed as a young child, and being presented with all that, starved most of her life. Don't forget, she was illegitimate as well, so the suggestion she was almost shunned within the family, possibly abused, who knows. So yes, it would have been
and also I think
to bring her on side, I think.
A big key factor into their witness statements was, back then it wasn't pot round for a brew, was it? Back then it wasn't pot round, oh, do you want a drink? I'll have a glass of water. They drank ale. Even the children drank ale.
They did,
and it was the same strength for a child as it was for somebody, a 60-year-old man. Roger Nowell might have had his mug of ale. Janet would have probably been given the same one.
I think there were different levels of ale. I think from the first brew was the strongest, and then they brew the same hops again and again, get everything out of it. So the lowest one was small ale. So they would have been more used to small ale, because I think they would have got most of their ale by begging. And if they did brew, I'm sure they would have sold the better quality one and drunk the lower one. So she would have been used to the small ale. But then, as you say, Roger Nowell, it would have been stronger ale, and they would have given it to the children, because that is what they would have done. Yes. And just an aside from that, his great uncle Alexander, I think he has been credited with inventing bottled ale. Yes, on a fishing trip, he put some into a jug, tied it off, put it into the river while he was fishing, and when he opened it, it fermented, and then passed it on to a brewing friend. So yes, going back, it was very much so. There would have been alcohol involved as well, more alcohol than you would have been used to, definitely.
So I think going forward a little bit more, I'm struggling to hear you a bit.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear Shelley.
No. She's giving up. She's muted herself. She's giving up. So going forward from the trials, something that's kind of is a burning question that I don't really want to talk about now. I think we should save it for tonight. Is to our theory as to what happened to little Jeanette after she watched her family's devastating. From what she'd said, it's really hard to put into words to how she must have felt. But we're going to talk about that later anyway. So if anybody's watching, 9 o'clock tonight, we have our Pendle Part 2, where we go through in really in-depth detail as to what happened when they were walked those 42 mile from Pendle to Lancaster, and everything that happened there.
Yes, and we're joined by Simon Entwistle and Thomas Broad as well.
We will, yes. And then obviously us three lovely ladies as well. So that's 9 o'clock tonight on our Facebook and also on our YouTube channel, which Shelley will gladly, I'm sure she'll nod along to this without no words needed. We'll post all the links and everything that everybody would need to follow up on that later. So moving on, he would have got quite a lot of credibility from the king for his findings
Yes, because don't forget, it's not only witchcraft. He has also foiled another gunpowder treason, blowing up Lancaster Castle, which would have been massive and given him great kudos. And even Thomas Potts's book about the trials were dedicated to Thomas Knivet, who was the man who foiled the gunpowder plot, and Guy Fawkes, and etc. So yes, so there was he gained an awful lot of status with the king, witches and blowing and
saving
the castle. Yes.
So then, obviously, all good things must come to an end, as did Roger Nowell's life. Now, I've had a bit of a chat with Thomas about this quite a while ago, and he was laid to rest, what I do believe to be in Whalley Cemetery in Whalley Church.
Right. I think that's what Thomas put up earlier. I don't know, to be honest. I haven't researched this yet. So
no, but then this is something that Thomas can help us out with. But then I'm sure, I could be totally wrong on this, I'm sure his grave was disturbed,
right,
and he was either moved or he still lies there. Could be totally wrong. We'll just waffle on a little bit until we perhaps get Thomas's comment on there. So there was a connection between the Knowles, between Roger and Whalley. It was quite a strong connection for him.
Yes, well, he was the parish of Whalley, so he was part of that, and very really at the top of that. So yes, very much so. The connection, and of course the parish is the church view of the area rather than the counties and the villages and towns. So right, he was very high up within the parish of Whalley. So yes.
Okay, I see. I think we might have lost Shelley. I think she's blessed her. She's been really struggling with her internet and her new laptop. I don't think it's working the way she wants it. Well, definitely not working the way she wants it. But I think to touch on any more of Roger Nowell's, it's more played into the part of what happened in the trial. And I think if we talk about that this morning, we're going to take a large chunk away from tonight.
Yes, well, we're coming up to our time anyway, and we're trying to work out just who he was and the character, and yes,
which I think we've done. I think we've done quite well on that one. I'm sure Thomas will pop his comment in the comments. I'm unable to see them right at this moment in time, about whether Roger Nowell still resides in Whalley Church or whether he doesn't, I suppose. On that one. So I'm just going to say, as part of Paranormal and History, thank you so much again, Karen. I've loved these 5 weeks. It's been so good to discuss something that's incredibly close to my heart, as it is yours.
It is, yes. And thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful. I've enjoyed it so much and learned a lot as well.
Cool. Yeah, here we go. So he was buried at Whalley, but his grave hasn't survived. From his father's, there have been many a family plot on the south side of the church, but it's impossible to be sure. Ah, okay.
Thank you, Thomas.
Okay. Yeah.
And actually, thank you for all your comments, Thomas. They're fascinating, and it's really good to be able to pin things down. And I'm in awe of your knowledge. And thank you so much.
Yeah. So is he there? Is he not? Maybe we'll have to do a paranormal investigation down there and see if we can talk to him.
There you go. Yes.
So yeah, I think Shelley, we're just winding up. So if you want to have a go at giving us a see you later, but thank you everyone that's tuned in with us again. I'll just say it just in case Shelley doesn't come through very clearly. Thank you for everyone that's watched us. Thank you everybody that's commented or taken it in, and we'll see you tonight at 9 o'clock.
Yes, see you tonight, and thank you from me as well to everybody. The comments have been fabulous, and the support as well. Thank you very much. Bye.
In 2 minutes, I can.